So feel free if you have things that come up that you're wondering about as we go along to either use your mic or the chat to talk. You're welcome to do either, both, neither. If you just want to kick back and listen, that's okay too. We're comfortable with just about anything on there. So today we're going to be talking about building presence in the online classroom. And, we'll get started, I think, by just introducing ourselves, and then give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves as well, and maybe say a little bit about what you're interested in getting out of this workshop. And on that note, I am Lainie Hoffman. I am an instructional designer with the Office of Digital Education. And today I'm working with Jessica. Jessica, I'll turn it over to you for a sec to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Critten, and I'm an instructional consultant with the Office of Digital Education. Happy to be speaking with everyone today. Very happy it's Friday. Yay.
Yes, I think that's like our common theme today, right? Like, yay, Friday.
The gift of Friday.
And somebody mentioned that the weather's nice outside, and now I'm like, I want to go on a walk after this. So I now have something else to look forward to too, in addition to some nice chatting with everybody. Would anybody like to take a sec to either mic introduce or chat introduce themselves?
Sure. I'm Cindy Barraway. I'm a lecturer in the Risk Management Insurance Program over in the business school. Anytime I can improve my online classroom, I'm happy to try to learn how to do that. So to continue to keep the students engaged.
Excellent. Thanks, Cindy.
Welcome.
Anybody else feeling up for a quick introduction?
I'm going to keep my camera off, but I'll introduce myself. My name is Allison White, and I am an instructor for the School of Education and Human Development. I teach an undergrad course for pre-service educators online. So making sure that the kind of classroom community that I have built up can be as good as it can be. Thanks.
Thanks, Allison.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Daney. I'm the training coordinator here at the Office of Digital Education. I help schedule and coordinate all of our trainings, and I also lead the Canvas Basics training.
Thanks, Nicole. Okay, and feel free if you, again, want to introduce yourself in the chat or add anything there. That's totally fine.
I'm Toby Kinney, and I am a clinical instructor in the physical therapy program, and I took the boot camp back in the spring, and I felt like just adding in the presence in the online classroom was such a critical component that I just felt compelled to keep on going with it. So I teach a lot of classes online, so I always find these helpful.
Awesome. Thanks, Toby.
Good morning. My name is Carlos Reali, and I'm an instructor for the sociology department. And basically, been teaching online for a very long time. We were one of the few departments that offered the whole bachelor's online. So we've been at it for a while, but we are in very special times right now, and anything that can help right now to even increase that presence in the classroom, in the online classroom, is greatly appreciated. So that's why I'm here. So once again, and thank you for the reminder that it was Friday. Once again, that was just spectacular. So thank you so much. No, I really mean it. I had no idea it was Friday. I forgot.
All right, so let's take a look at the agenda here. So we're going to start off, so that this idea of presence, we have kind of, we're highlighting it out of this framework of the community of inquiry. So we'll talk a little bit just about what the community of inquiry is and why it's important in online teaching, and some helpful kind of grounding thoughts on why we want to use it in our online classrooms. And then I'll turn things over to Jessica after we get some of that groundwork done to talk about more like practical examples and start some of the discussion around what that might look like in our online classrooms. And we'll head into a discussion on challenges and barriers to presence in our classrooms. And I think that sometimes we do breakout rooms for this, but Jessica and I decided we'll kind of keep it a whole group discussion, and that will help hopefully give everybody options for how they choose to participate. Again, anytime if you have questions, feel free to use your mic or the chat. We're happy with all of those options in here. And then we'll do some just quick wrap up with reflections, questions, and takeaways there at the end. So community of inquiry. What is the community of inquiry? So this is an older concept, and it actually started off as a concept that they were using for scientific inquiry. And it's really just broadly the idea that if you bring a group of people together to look at a problem and solve it, they're all going to be able to bring different pieces of that together and work together to figure out a better solution than they might have as individuals. And John Dewey in it was like the late 1950s, I believe, took this idea and started more systematically applying it to education. So the idea that you can actually plan for this in your classroom and talk about this as something that your students each bring a different perspective, and they can work together to explore concepts together in a way that's more powerful than just individually exploring a topic. And then in the early 2000s, which kind of keeping in mind that the early 2000s for technology still looked a lot different than they does today, Garrison Anderson and Archer created this model. And this model is kind of what we'll use throughout here with this nice Venn diagram. And they broke it down into 3 different areas. And they framed this in the theory of presence. So there's teaching presence, cognitive presence, and social presence. And we'll talk about kind of how they envisioned each of those, and we'll give examples. But these 3 different areas of presence are overlapping and all work together to kind of help frame this idea of community of inquiry in the online classroom. So let's see here, if we could move forward. Thank you. So why is this useful to us and to our students? So, kind of starting with the most theoretical part of this, the community of inquiry works really well with learner-centered pedagogy, specifically with constructivism. And it helps us bring a more holistic approach that focuses on student experience into our online learning environments. And the other thing, and this to me is like a super practical thing, right? Because it can be really hard to envision what an online course might look like. And the community of inquiry framework is a really easy entry point to start guiding our meaningful course preparation as well as instructional strategy. And those, especially for those of us who've been teaching online for a long time, I think everybody at this point probably has some experience, considering that we've been doing everything remotely. But it takes a lot of planning and prep work to make the online classroom work well. So this is a good way of helping us frame that and be intentional and thoughtful in how we're putting things together. The other thing that's true of the online environment is that we are much more separated from our students because we have those extra elements of space and time that are offset from our students. So this is a way that we can purposefully start to plan and to bridge those gaps and engage students with us as their instructors, with their peers in the classroom, as well as with the material. And then last, but certainly not least, even if you're not so much into the theory part of this, I think we all know that there is sort of this isolating factor in the online environment. And it turns out that when people kind of look at what are some of the best solutions for students to bridge that and become more successful in the online environment, the sense of presence and sort of that feeling of being there is actually the leading predictor of student success for online classrooms. And in these studies, it's been shown that students are more likely to persist in their classes and their programs. They're more likely to perform well in their classrooms. and they're more likely to be satisfied at the end of their learning experience. And then of course, it also reduces that feeling of isolation. So those are kind of the main points where I think it's useful from multiple perspectives to be thinking about how the community of inquiry is useful in your classroom. So let's get a little more into the details of those different kinds of presence. So we'll start with social presence. Social presence is the ability of learners to project their personal characteristics into the course community and thereby presenting themselves as real people to one another. So, I think that's probably a pretty accessible thing, right? Like, we want to know that we're not working with robots. We want to know that there are other people out there who are alongside us exploring these same concepts. And it gives us a good starting point for not being alone in this online classroom. I also like it to kind of frame this in terms of, especially for certain disciplines where maybe you're talking about topics that are a little harder, that social presence can help build that trust that you might need in the classroom in order to talk about things that are hard to talk about in social settings. So the social presence is a good place to kind of conceptualize in a couple different ways. And I think trust building is a really good one for that. So some of the challenges in building social presence in our classroom really revolve around the idea that this is an easy entry point. Like, the easiest thing you can do to build social presence is to introduce yourself, right? Like, I am a person, I have a name, I can tell you how to pronounce my name, I can tell you a little bit about my background, and now you know me a little bit as a person. So kind of moving from those surface level day-to-day social interactions into this relationship where we are comfortable exploring challenging concepts together. So that's a tough transition sometimes. So that's the challenge of the social presence. Teaching presence. So teaching presence is a little bit more about you as the instructor, right? And this involves, the design, the facilitation, the direction of the processes that we're planning for within the classroom, as well as making sure that we're establishing, ourselves as a facilitator and guide, and establishing that relationship with our students. So there are a couple different elements in that. And when Jessica gets into some of the more specific practical examples of how to do that, she'll talk a little bit more about those different areas within the teaching presence. So the challenge within teaching presence is really balancing all that, because you've got a lot of work to do to put this class together, right? There's the structure of the class, there's making sure that you're facilitating, there's making sure that the students have access to you, giving feedback. So all of those things can be challenging to balance. And sometimes, like, in the community of inquiry, that the idea that as a community, we need to work together. For teachers, that can sometimes be a little hard because they might be a little more used to being active. So finding that balance between letting the community work together in the classroom versus sort of always being the person in charge can be a challenge. And then our third one, if we can add our cognitive presence, and this is kind of the sweet one right here, because this is really about the learning, right? So what are the students learning in the classroom? How are they connecting to the meaning of the class, to the materials in the class, and how well are they able to reflect on their learning along the way? So the challenges with cognitive are essentially related to the level of complexity in students' relationship to the cognitive understanding of the class, the point of the class, right? So, and I sometimes think of this in relation to Bloom's taxonomy, if anybody out there is a believer in the Blooms. So it's easy enough to get to some of these lower levels of complexity. I can read and remember this concept. I can kind of tell you a little bit about what it's about, but getting to that next level where you increase the complexity of your understanding of it, I can apply this concept. I see how this concept relates to a similar concept and I'm comfortable pulling what makes sense for this particular situation together. Those are harder things for students to get to. And that's one of the challenges of that cognitive presence in the classroom. So let's take a quick look, going over all of those. You know, we talk a lot about social presence in this, and some of that is because social presence tends to overlap everything within the online classroom. There's still things that the instructor does on their own. There's still things that the students do on their own, but so much of what happens here is based and overlaps with that social presence element. So sometimes we like to pull out this more updated version of the community of inquiry, and it kind of highlights the importance of social presence in that classroom environment a little bit better in our minds. And this is how we tend to see it actually play out in our classrooms. And when we talk to other instructors, that tends to speak to them a little more as well. But like any framework, you might mix and match a little bit depending on your discipline, on your course. Maybe your student audience just doesn't need as much of one of these, you know, compared to the others. You know, people who are newer to higher education in terms of being a student, a learner, might not need quite as much structure for some of this stuff. So it makes sense to be responsive in terms of who our student audience is as to how we're planning for each of these things. They don't always have to be exactly the same for every single classroom. It is just good to consider how they fit together with your classroom, with your student audience in your particular setting, to best speak to your student audience as well as your course as a whole. So let's see here. And kind of with that in mind, I encourage you, as Jessica gets into some of our more practical application, be thinking too about your student audience and what they bring to the construction of community of inquiry. Not every element has to be just you doing it for them or setting it up for them. There can be opportunities for students to help you put that together, right? So as Jessica's going through, kind of think about, is there an opportunity or would it make sense for students to help me plan for this rather than just me doing all of the planning? And with that, Jessica, I will turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you. So yeah, we're going to get now into some sort of practical applications of sort of what social teaching and cognitive presence might look like in your course. I will say though, as we go through this, I don't know that it's productive all of the time to say, well, is this social presence? Is this teaching presence? Is this cognitive presence? As Lainie talked about with that, that great graph, that great image in the last slide, they're all really interconnected to each other. They all build off of each other. They all make each other more rich. So just sort of think about all of these things as they relate to each other, and sort of in what contexts you would want to use some of these things. And I will also say, as we go through some of these examples, it is an exhausting list, but it is not an exhaustive list. So I'm going to be reaching out to all of you to maybe share some ideas about how you've implemented some of these ideas, how you've sort of made them practical and concrete and actionable, and also to share maybe some things here that, that aren't on this list. And I'll say too, we also have a little tip sheet with more ideas and also specifically some ideas about how you can implement these things specifically in Canvas, our good friend Canvas. All right, so to start out with, some ideas about how to build social presence. This is a quote from UDL on Campus, which stands for Universal Design for Learning. Students need to be able to learn from and with each other as skillfully as they can learn from materials or a teacher, right? We're operating within a community of inquiry. So one thing that you can have students do is go into Canvas and sort of think about places where they can show some of their personality, communicate more information about themselves in Canvas, which can seem like a kind of difficult space to like have a personality and stuff. So they can update their Canvas profiles, update their pictures, they can add their pronouns, they can give a little bit of a bio of themselves. This is something that other students can see, and it's also something that you can see. Maybe in some of your face-to-face classes, I know I've done this in the past. The first day will be something like, you want to have those like index cards that you have students fill out. What's your name? What's your major? What are you hoping to get out of this class? What's your favorite ice cream flavor? Something like that. So a Canvas profile can be a place where you get to know some things about your students as well. Another thing you can do is to set expectations for community behavior and give opportunities for peer-to-peer engagement throughout the course. And you can see maybe here how this also overlaps with teaching presence, right? You're helping to give students a structure in which they can create their own social presence and be successful. So this can be something like recognizing that online tone is really hard to convey. So what does it mean to be respectful? What does it mean to be informal and respectful? How do we treat each other? How do we talk to each other? What words do we not want to use? And also creating spaces for students to ask each other for help, to ask each other, I didn't understand this thing that we talked about in the last class. How did you interpret that? So that can be informal and more formal peer-to-peer spaces like discussion boards, group projects, things like that. Another suggestion is to include introductions or icebreakers for low stakes socializing early in the course. This might look like an introductions discussion board, right? You take that index card idea and then you translate it into a discussion board. What's your name? What are you most worried about in terms of taking an online class? What are your dog's names and can we see pictures of them? That sort of thing. And for that matter, again, your students can create those videos, they can share things about themselves, and so can you. If what we're hoping to achieve in a community of inquiry is building trust, then one way that students would trust you is if they get to know more about you and see you as a human being who's approachable and who's genuinely rooting for them to succeed. You can also integrate discussions where dialogue will deepen the connection to content or help refine critical thinking skills. And hopefully here we can also see how this overlaps with something like cognitive presence, sort of thinking about within the structure of your class, where it's beneficial for students to talk to each other, when it's beneficial to have students have more space to ask questions about a difficult concept, actually do some work to concretize that. If it's a lab, sort of applying some of these ideas. And group-based activities like group projects, collaborative document creation, student-led inquiry, these are all ways that you can accomplish a number of the other things on this slide. We have a whole other training on sort of the best way to set up group projects and address some of those common issues that come up in group projects. We know that that can be tough, but there are lots of ways to make it successful. And it is, again, a great place for students to talk to each other, to get to know each other, to become accountable for each other, and also to take ownership over projects. A great way that students become motivated is to have some feeling of autonomy. And that's something you can absolutely accomplish in a group setting. Collaborative document creation, you can use tools like Hypothesis to have a bunch of people do like a social annotation project where they're responding to a text and asking each other questions and building off ideas. Or jump into something like Google Docs, or you can have students work together to build their own sort of deliverable where each person has sort of thoughtful assigned roles. Student-led inquiry in something like a discussion board, have students lead and facilitate that discussion, have them come up with their own discussion questions, like Lainie said, within this, think about places where students can kind of lead the charge and shape some of this social presence on their own. So I'm going to throw it back to everyone now. What are some ways that you build social presence in your courses? You can maybe talk about some times that you've used some of these ideas, or if you have other ideas, please share those. So again, chat's fine, or if you want to unmute, we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Cindy was just talking about in the chat some ideas about introductions and having students make sure to comment on each other's, and then just, you know, finding commonalities, which I think is a really good way of thinking of some of these sort of low stakes environment. You know, we're just trying to find that common ground to get started, right?
Yeah, I love that idea. In the past, I've taught kind of interdisciplinary courses. So courses in which students had all kinds of different majors. And maybe if y'all are teaching survey courses or first year courses, that's your experience as well. And the introduction board is always like, oh, you're a nursing major? I'm also a nursing major. That's amazing. Let's have a study group. Or, you know, oh, you've got a Weimaraner, I've got a Weimaraner. Let's go to the park together. You'll see most of my introductions are very dog focused. You know, everyone's got their thing. But yeah, I love that idea, Cindy. Low stakes, absolutely. What else do y'all do to create social presence in your class? Oh, Allison, part of my dog desire is that I don't have one. But if y'all have dog pictures, I would love to see them. Let's create a little social presence in our own webinar. Toby has short videos instead of text for discussion posts, and there's a lot of ways to integrate those pretty seamlessly in Canvas. They will add a personal item, a movie you watched, activities during the weekend. Yeah, that's great. And those things, I think, are even more needed in our current moment, right? Maybe we're all kind of in our apartments dreaming of dogs and personal connections or dog connections.
I think that's an excellent point. And one thing I want to throw out there, because, you know, one of the things that has come up a lot more now that us and our students have kind of been thrown more into the online realm than maybe we anticipated, is don't forget that there are alternative types of media too that help bridge that gap a little bit. So, you know, if you have students who have terrible internet connection and video is a complete pain for them, there's still, you know, audio only is a lot lower bandwidth for people. So that might be a good option. And I've also seen people do like visual collage types of work. So still bringing some of that visual element in there, but maybe keeping it a little easier on people's internet abilities, or connections, not abilities.
All right, if anything else comes up as we keep talking.
Wait, I have a question.
Go for it.
I'm sorry, I joined a little late. I was having trouble getting into Zoom there, but I did have a question for Toby about his post here. But just let me give a little introduction real quick. I teach in a business school under the moniker Mr. Eric, and that's my name back when I was a radio talk show host in the mid-1990s. I am your host, Mr. Eric, right here on your AM dial in Boulder. And so I use a lot of videos, but Toby, this thing about these videos, are these things that you are, these are videos that you do or that the students do?
I will lead it off for the week on my own. And then I expect them to respond using that kind of medium.
I see. So the students have to, I guess, make a video addressing this topic in your discussion post. Is that the idea?
That's correct. Yeah, just to try to mix it up and create some more personalization, because especially the course I'm doing right now, it's all discussion posts. And so it can get less personal, I guess, as you're reading all through the text. And I've also found that embedding the videos keeps it relatively succinct, but it adds an element of, I guess, online intimacy, if you will, just to make sure everyone's knows who they are. I mean, because there's been times where I felt like I've gone through the course and no one knows who I am relatively.
And what do you teach? I'm sorry.
I'm in physical therapy, so I teach clinical reasoning currently, and then we've done some blended instruction with our exam eval, and then integrated practice, so all throughout all 3 years of the program.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. I think I forgot to mention I teach in the business school, finance, risk management, statistics, accounting when they let me, entrepreneurship, a bunch of things. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you both.
And the students do know me as Mr. Eric. That's kind of my stage name, if you will.
Nice.
Yeah, that's great. And we're about to get into talking about how we sort of mediate our tone as a way to build connections with students. And it sounds like you're ahead of the game there, Mr. Eric.
Well, I will say that my classes are pretty successful. My FCQs are high. Every semester when the written evaluations, I get multiple, probably half a dozen last semester. Students at least said, this is the best online class I've ever taken. And that's across a few different courses that I teach, frankly. So I'm doing pretty good with this, but hoping to pick up some, maybe a little theory behind what it is I'm actually doing. I do it more by feel. You got to feel the rock and roll finance show. That's what I do. It's not a finance class. It's the Mr. Eric Rock and Roll Finance Show, or the Mr. Eric Rock and Roll Risk Management Show. So, but I do it. So anyway, I'm interested to more hear about some of this theory here. Thank you.
So this is Cindy. Mr. Eric's 3809 class is a prereq for one of mine, and I have to follow him. So I tell the students, or I ask them first, so have you had Mr. Eric for 3809, whether online or in person? And if a majority of the class says yes, I said, please do not compare me to Mr. Eric, because I'm not Mr. Eric. So I'm not going to be, that same level of energy on an online course. So that's why I'm here, is so I can make my course better, because I'm following Mr. Eric in most cases. And yes, I had a student tell me just the other day, Mr. Eric is the reason why she stayed at the business school, was because of his class. It kept her engaged, and also had her change her major to risk management insurance, which is how she ended up in my class. So.
Thank you, Cindy. So Cindy and I teach in the same program, clearly, one of them. Thank you, Cindy. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Oh, I love this so much. It seems like if we're talking about theory and trying to get the heart of everything, it's figuring out how to be, we're talking about presence, but it's really figuring out how to be present and how to make something feel alive and in the moment and fun to you authentically. My kind of fun is different than Nicole's kind of fun, is different than Lainie's kind of fun. But when we present it, we're being authentic to ourselves. And I think that students respond to that. When you're genuinely enthusiastic about something, and, we can theorize left and right and all around what that means. But it comes down to, I think, finding something in what you're teaching that you're genuinely enthusiastic about, or that you can tie to something that you're genuinely enthusiastic about. And that enthusiasm is catching, So thank you, Cindy and Eric, for sharing. It's so neat that both of you are here, and we can sort of talk about not just how this works within one class, but how it works within the bigger picture, how we can build off of each other and help each other and bring each other up. All right, so teaching presence, which is the design and the development of course and materials, and then how we facilitate all of those things that we have made. So on the one level, this is being intentional. This is going through a process of design. And this is something that someone like Lainie, who's an instructional designer, her job is to sort of help people think through what this looks like, because it's not easy. And a few ideas around how to have your teaching presence come through in your design. Really, a lot of it is around organization. That's what sets students up to be successful. Having them know what to expect from the class and from you. So that is thinking through your content and how it all goes together, grouping it together thoughtfully, using things like labels. In Canvas, we have things like modules that you can create a sort of linear work path. You can show students how these ideas and these concepts relate to each other, how they build off of each other. And you can also decide with things like prerequisites, how students access that content. You know, you have to pass this thing, or you have to read this thing before you go on to this thing. So really setting up an experience for them and being consistent in that experience that you're setting up. Again, helping them know what they can expect. Being clear. This is difficult. In the past, what I have done is I will do the best I can and put together, if it's a course design, if it's an assignment prompt, I will have someone else read it before I make it go live, make it go prime time, because it might make total sense to you, and then someone else will read a word differently, or, you know, it happens all of the time. I have found that if there's a way to read something differently than what I intended, students will find that out. And at that point, it's like, well, you're not wrong. I can totally see how you got there.
I love that, Jessica. I think just being aware that your logic is not necessarily somebody else's logic, and being prepared to kind of walk people through that a bit. Over the summer, I had a kind of embarrassing experience where we were in week 4 and I got a message from a faculty member who was like, why did I have to go to Google to like look up what all this meant? And I was like, I had all the content pages in there. Turns out she'd made it through 4 weeks without understanding that there were content pages or where to find them. And that was terrible. That was a terrible realization. So, you know, being prepared to address some of that and walk people through and make sure people are getting where stuff is so important.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was in one of these training workshops a few weeks ago, led by your office there. And one thing they said, we talked about this clear instructions, is, tell the students where to find this, that, or the other. And actually, this was before the semester started, so I've always did a little bit of that, but I've made a conscious effort to, okay, here, now you got to go over to the modules menu, or now you got to go to under the announcements area. So I think that's a good instruction to really point to people where to go. Maybe that's more under the labels thing. But yeah, students need, a lot of them need direction on where to look within the course shell, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I think that speaks to these points.
Yes, yeah. And that's where, especially if you are able to work with people in your program, if you do have an online program or aware of other people teaching online in your program, some of those consistencies just in organization doesn't mean you have to like make it a box package that everybody just does the same way, but organization that's consistent between courses also helps with that if you have that opportunity.
Awesome. So those are just a few ways or a few things to think about in the overall design of your course, thinking about how students are going to be encountering these things and maybe what issues they might run into in that process. Once you sort of built the thing though, now you have to facilitate it. And so when we talk about building teaching presence, like I mentioned before, that's being present. So in discussions, like in discussion boards, it's, participating when you can, as you can. I know that a lot of people have huge classes that make that very difficult, but asking leading questions, following up to say, can you tell me more about that? Again, thinking about those prompts, writing them out in a way to think about what you want students to be able to demonstrate, giving students continuous feedback. This is great in something like a project, like maybe you have a big final project, and instead of just having them turn in that big final project, you kind of chunk it up into different stages, or you let them turn in drafts. That way, the final project they turn in, you will have given a lot of feedback, you will have identified with them maybe what they're not quite getting or understanding. So again, Canvas has some tools, and the speed grader feature, you're not just giving them a grade, you're able to specifically say, I'm concerned about this, or you did this really well. So using technology to help facilitate that feedback, and you can also have it be something that's a back and forth. They have questions about your feedback, just to really hone in and make sure that they're getting what you hope that they get. Encouraging student reflection throughout. So maybe after an assignment, you're thinking about spaces where students can think about how they did, what they would change, what's confusing about what just happened. I'm trying to think of the John Dewey quote talking about John Dewey, something like, we learn through reflection, or something like that. It's a really good quote. I have to find it again. But basically, reflection is the process of learning. We think back about what the process was and what we've taken from it. So communicating with the class regularly, if that is setting an announcement and being consistent about that, yes, metacognition. So if you have an announcement at the beginning of every week, make sure you have that announcement at the beginning of every week. Students will come to expect that. And also sort of setting expectations about how you're planning to interact with your students. If you don't like the conversations or the inbox email feature in Canvas, you want them to email your school account. Just be sort of clear about that. You can expect to have a response from me in 48 working hours, something like that. Again, this is a theme, right? Clear expectations, clear instructions. You can also sort of model what reflection looks like in your teaching. So asking clarifying questions. You said this, can you tell me more about this? Or what did you mean by this? When students need something, or they are giving you feedback, assessments, tests, grades, that's a form of communication, that's feedback. So having that not be the end of the conversation, but sort of the next step in the conversation, and then making adjustments. Nothing is ever set in stone. I always like to say, I've been teaching in higher education and online for about 10 years now. And the one thing I come back to is that my content or my plan is less important than what students need right now. So if I have to spend more time on something that's important, then I'll do it. That's sort of what it means to be present. So now back to all of you. What are some things that you do to build teaching presence, to design with intent, to facilitate thoughtfully, to challenge your students? Those things that really are within your control.
I give weekly quizzes in one of my classes, and if I find out that, for example, a lot of the students missed a particular question, then I, obviously go, I must not have taught that correctly. So then I might load up a video of me re-explaining that concept, because it's probably going to show up on an exam. So I just want to give them more feedback other than what I may have written back individually to each person, and then ask again, if you have any questions on this topic, please let me know. But I do try to monitor the quizzes and the exams to see what questions they're missing.
Yeah, that's great. I just put in the chat, when we give out quizzes, when we give out assignments, when we give out tests, they're not just to communicate to the student how they're doing in the class. They're also information for us to let us know what we need to cover again, what people aren't getting, what we need to spend more time on. And also you might find, oh, everyone's getting this, I can move on. So just giving ourselves the time and the space to respond to those things, super important. That's great, Cindy.
I love that. I feel like that's a great example of, even for something that traditionally might be seen as a like, oh, you took a quiz, you're done with that now. Like, it's more powerful if you move that forward and say, what is this moment of reflection on how this class is going, on how the students are doing, and not just say it's done, so that's just it. I love that.
What else do people do to build their teaching presence? Maybe some things that you do when you are putting together your Canvas course, or things in your syllabus design, things you include in your syllabus every year. Yeah, Eric, go for it.
I mean, I guess the main thing I do is I do a lot of video lectures, and I mean, they take forever. It can take me up to 4 hours to put together, shoot, load up, and so forth, everything, a 12-minute video on one topic. You're talking a small piece of one class. So it's really time consuming. I've been doing this since 07, I think, was when I first started doing online. So at this point, I've kind of built up a pretty good library. But I think, with the video, they get to, kind of feel the teacher. They get to see the teacher, hear the teacher, they experience. And so, and I guess part of the reason I did the videos in the first place, it was kind of revolutionary back in 2007 when I first started teaching online. But I was successful in a classroom, a live classroom. And so what I was trying to do is just to recreate what I do in a live classroom in an online class, and it seemed like video was the best way to do that. So anyway, that's why I do it. Whether that would be helpful for somebody else, I'm not sure. But with videos, they can see and hear you, and they get a sense of who you are as a person. Cindy, did you want to say something there?
Well, yeah, because you did videos, I thought I need to do videos too. So what's the building on Lawrence? They have a little studio where you can go in and record. So I would go in there, and I'm not a tech person, had to learn how to use all their equipment because I don't want to bother them all the time. And so I can have a PowerPoint up behind me, plus they get to see me at the same time, or if there's a video, I could be a little more creative, I guess, than if I was just sitting in front of my laptop at home trying to record a video. And I heard from students that they prefer to see your face and hopefully some movement, and not just a talking head, or not just a PowerPoint slide and a voice in the background. They wanted to see you. And I know when I've been on campus, students that I've had that I don't know what they necessarily look like because it's a tiny little picture in Canvas. They'll say hello to me, and then I have to figure out, who they are. It's because they've seen me every week because of the videos that are out there.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, those are great. Thank you so much. Please feel free to keep this conversation going in the chat. I'm going to move on to cognitive presence, which Lainie mentioned is where the learning happens. So triggering cognition, metacognition, so thinking about your own thinking, collaboration, application, testing of ideas. We're not just repeating information, we're demonstrating learning, demonstrating that we have the ability to engage in future learning. So this is thinking about the prompts. Are they thoughtful? Are they intentional? Are they communicating what you want them to communicate? And a lot of this begins with your learning goals or your learning objectives, or just what is it that I want students to get out of this assignment? What do I want them to be able to do? And then what's the best way for them to show me that they know what they're doing? They're getting what I want them to get out of it. So an example of this, students maybe will watch a video. Maybe it's something that you've made. Maybe it's something that lives in the wild of the internet that explores a concept. So this is the theory. This is sort of the abstract idea. And then they're giving an opportunity to practice, to put those theories, those ideas into practice. So those activities might be different depending on what your discipline is. Maybe they're in the lab, maybe they're writing a business plan, maybe they're responding to a specific case study, but actually giving them an opportunity in class to demonstrate that they kind of get the larger idea. Again, we mentioned this in social presence, but collaboration, group projects, team-based learning, that also helps build cognitive presence. Someone will have an idea, and then someone else in the group can add on to that idea or sort of push back on that idea. Mr. Eric mentioned sometimes you might have an opportunity for something like groupthink, but I think a lot of the times, if the prompt is moving enough, and people have sort of thoughtful roles within the larger group, the final project is better than what one person would come up with on their own. So iterative practice is another approach here. So that's maybe different versions of a project. That could be drafts if maybe students are writing, you know, some kind of paper or something like that. We have drafts for all kinds of things. An e-portfolio. So at the end of the class, students will have all of these artifacts of their learning, and these are things that they can take with them outside of the class. That helps sort of, I think, reinforce to students the importance of what you're talking about within a class. And shifted prompts. So I've always said one of the best ways to learn something is to have to teach it. So, you know, having students take an idea and then teach it to the class or teach it to another person. I've had an assignment in the past where I have, you know, given a quick lecture and then I've said, okay, break out into groups and have one person describe or sum up what I just said to the other person. And the other person asks the other person questions about that. And then we all get back together and say, these are our questions. This is how I understood this. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. And again, giving students opportunity to evaluate themselves, to reflect on what they've done. This is also reflecting on areas that maybe they're still confused about, they need some reinforcement, they have questions about, but also their own strengths. This is what I did really well. This is what I got out of the class. This is what is going to be meaningful to me. This is what has kept me in this major and has made me decide to be a risk manager. Real quick, anybody have anything that they want to share, things they've done to build cognitive presence, to give students spaces to demonstrate their learning in the classroom? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so with the self-evaluation at the bottom of the screen, opportunities for self-evaluation, I teach finance, quantitative courses. And so I have a lot of practice problems and solutions up there, practice quizzes with solutions that they can go through to do that self-evaluation. So it's helpful. The students who do well in the class say that those things are vital. And a lot of the times the students who are not doing very well, they're not paying attention to them at all, right? You can go behind in the analytics and see what's going on and stuff. So that would be, I guess, what I would say. This for no grade. So it's optional, I guess, in that way.
Yeah.
But just an idea for people that you might want to try some kind of practice and items and provide the solution.
Yeah, that's so great. I'm seeing this come up a lot in people's responses is sort of low stakes assignments. And these are really just places to play and places to identify gaps in learning. You know, a draft can be a low stakes assignment, a practice test or a practice quiz. And it also helps students have an idea about what they can expect kind of from the real thing. And so the focus is more in that space on the learning and not on, you know, what will this quiz look like? What are all of the, you know, what do my margins have to be and that kind of thing. So it's not like, how can I not mess up on this thing? It's more, how can I show what I've learned and what I'm missing? These are great.
And I love that. I mean, that is, you know, I think we get focused a lot on what grades mean for passing a class or moving forward. And hopefully we have opportunities to see some of that evaluative piece as more being like, where are those gaps for me and how can I improve that or change that? Or what else do I need to know about my learning? And that's hard for students to get to. It's hard for instructors to get to sometimes too, right? Like it's not just about passing the course, it's about finding ways of improving.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will also share this link with you in the chat before we leave, but this is just a tip sheet that you can refer back to. You can make a copy of it and add on to it or subtract from it as you need to. Sort of capture some of the things that we just talked about and also some specifically some ideas about how you can actualize these things in Canvas. Recognizing that we don't have the time or the bandwidth to go into absolutely everything that we could do. But you will have this tip sheet if and when you need it. So again, this is the link to it, and we'll give it to you in another way so you can click on it.
I'll put it in the chat in just a sec. Let me.
Awesome. So now we're going to talk about, we mentioned this before, but one thing you can do, especially when it comes to something like establishing your own teaching presence, building those kinds of relationships, being approachable for students, is sort of thinking about what an appropriate tone would be if those are your goals within your own context. These sort of things are especially important online because we don't always have the benefit of nonverbal cues. You know, even when we get to see each other's faces, we're still missing a lot. So this is something about which, you know, you use your own judgment, you know your students, you know your content, you know your profession. So sort of thinking about what tone works in those situations. And also understanding that tone is something that will change depending on what your assignment is. But just really thinking about it, putting some time into thinking about the tone, the language that you use in your communication. So here's an example, specifically just as a place to start in an announcement. So this is an example of a more formal announcement. Hello, class. This week is focused on the readings. They're very challenging. You need to focus your efforts to be successful. If you have any questions arise, please direct them to the designated discussion area or bring them to the Zoom office hours. Again, a more formal approach might be better suited to whatever your context is. But over here on the right is an example of that announcement in a more conversational tone. Hi, everyone. Hope you had a good first week. As we ramp up for week 2, you'll notice there's a heavy reading load and some selections are particularly challenging. Don't get discouraged if this takes you some time to understand these. It certainly did for me when I first read them. Please feel free to ask any questions you have in the open forum or join me for office hours via Zoom. It may be daunting, but you are more than capable. I look forward to exploring these concepts together. I'm just curious about what your impressions are of these two announcements, of the approaches of these two announcements, what they convey differently, maybe how you think they would be received differently by students. And again, you can share in chat or unmute.
Jessica, this always makes me think of how at least I was taught to write in a formal setting, and that's you avoid referring to yourself. So I and you is like sort of avoid that. And that doesn't make as much sense when we're trying to connect personally with each other, right? It just doesn't feel like a personal connection. It feels like we're trying to remove ourselves from the situation, which I guess we're literally doing if we're not referring to ourselves as I and you as you.
Yeah, and I think we're using I, and then we're also saying like, this was tough for me. Just recognizing our sort of shared humanity in this moment. And like I said, I think more than anything, it's important to be authentic in these moments. So a conversational tone for one person might be different than a conversational tone for someone else. But I remember when I was in grad school, I was taking like a critical theory class, super tough, dense stuff. And I was freaked out the first day. The instructor came in and she said, this stuff is really hard. It's okay if it's hard for you. I'm on your team. I just always remembered that phrase, I'm on your team. So especially when you're working on really intense things, to say like, this is tough. If you're feeling like this is tough, it's because it's tough. You know, I think that acknowledgement does a lot to humanize you, does a lot to maybe bring down students' fear, apprehension about what's to come. And ideally, if they're stuck, hopefully they'll be more apt to reach out to you.
Yeah, I like that framing too, because it's also speaks to students can get very easily distracted by fear of not being able to do something, and just saying that that's like, it's normal to not be able to do it right away helps bridge that so much.
Yeah, go for it, Eric.
The other thing I would say for this first conversational, not the very short one, but as we ramp up for week 2, it goes back to, I think, the teaching presence, where you're trying to put some personality into it, and who you are, and this tone, as opposed to the formal tone of the other column, does that.
Yeah, great. Thank you so
Among
much.
other things, besides setting expectations.
Mhm.
But it creates, I think, a commercial, when you talk about, hey, here's how it was for me, I know what you're going through. I mean, I said that in a class yesterday, in a Zoom class, so it creates a connection.
Yeah,
The
yes.
teaching presence.
Yes, thank you. That's great. We talked about to encourage cognitive presence, and also within the realm of what you can control as a part of teaching presence, thinking through your prompts. So some ways to, or some places to begin with that in the planning process, thinking about who your students are, where they are in the learning process, and sort of having that be your starting point. Thinking about how this particular assignment advances your students' learning in the course and overall in the program. Again, so cool that we have Eric and Cindy both here. It's a great thing to be able to talk to each other about these sorts of things. How can I set students up here to be successful when they're with you? How can you evaluate if students are demonstrating their learning, and also if your assignment is actually accomplishing what you want it to accomplish? So it's kind of two different things to look for there. Within the structure of the assignment prompt, how are you communicating the purpose to students so they have the opportunity to process and reflect on their own growth? I think often we think about teaching as demonstrating things that students know, but really it's creating spaces for students to not know things and then to learn. So how are you doing that in your assignments? Also, and this I think is really important, is to think about if and where you can include something like a model or something like an example. Again, that way students have clear expectations, they know what you're looking for, and they can really hone in and focus on demonstrating what they've learned. And again, here are some examples of assignment prompts. The rudimentary one, it's very straightforward. You're discussing readings on the discussion board. Here are your questions. Since this is a discussion, I expect you to interact with your peers and respond to at least two different posts by the end of the week. I think I have used that exact prompt maybe 1,000 times. But a stronger version of this could be, reminder, in this course, you are participating in weekly discussions. This is why we engage in discussions, because they help us consider different perspectives, explore new ideas, and refine our thinking about the readings. So this is what you're doing. This is why you are engaging in this particular kind of assignment. Each week you'll start by either sharing your impression of the author's purpose. So I want to know what you are taking away from this. How are you interpreting this? Or what you consider to be the author's strongest argument. So it's a little higher up on Bloom's, right? Because the main purpose of this discussion is to start a dialogue with one another, I'll also be looking to see that you've substantively interacted with your peers over the course of the week. So what do we like about the stronger prompt? How could we make it stronger? Or what do we not like about it?
So it might need some explanation when it says, this is Cindy, at the very end of that stronger one is I'll also be looking to see that you have substantively interacted with your peers over the course of the week. They may go, well, what does substantive interaction mean? Do I just say great? Do I say a whole sentence? Do I need to add a paragraph? I know a lot of times students want to know what are the full requirements to get the points, whether it's the number of words or how many pages something is. So that, that might just need a little more definition for them to feel comfortable.
Yeah, one thing I was going to mention on the previous slide, we were saying include this, that, and the other. I forget what it was already, but what came to mind is grading rubrics. So to show where the points come from, basically what Cindy said. So I think that would be the one question I have about what's on here is that what does that mean substantively interacted? So
Yeah.
grading rubric really is what it comes out.
I think that's a good point. And you know, depending on your student audience, they may need like a lot of structure with that. If you have students who are newer to this, you know, the structure is helpful for them to envision that. And maybe with students who are maybe a little further along in the program, graduate students, they might need a little less of that. But I think that's an excellent point. And also good for, like, it gives you a good place to jump in there or make maybe the first discussion a little more like, let's feel this out. And I can give you guys some pointers for the next time around as well.
Yes, these are so good. And so now let's just take a moment and we can pull from anything that we've talked about up until now, or maybe as we've been talking, you've been thinking about your own circumstance. I know a few of you are teaching super big classes, so that might be a challenge or a barrier to developing presence. But so let's sort of see if we can work through some of these issues together. I do want to be mindful of the time, so kind of move through this, but does anyone have maybe a specific challenge or a barrier to developing presence, maybe from your own experience, that we can talk about as a team? Don't worry about the spokesperson thing. We're all spokespeople, spokesfolk.
For me, it is typically more in the larger classes. So for example, my final is more of a paper or a presentation. I want to know if you're going to be an insurance agent or a broker. I give them a scenario of here's a potential client. Tell me what type of insurance they may need and why. And when I had smaller classes, it was I had them do it one-on-one with me. And I said that I just want to put you kind of in a role play scenario so that when you're out in the real world and risk management insurance, I can see how you interact. And there's you don't have to know everything. And so if somebody were to tell me, well, you really needed blah, blah, blah insurance. And I'd go, why would I need that? And so they have a chance to answer that. And if they don't know the answer, I tell them up front, if you don't know an answer to something, never make it up. Just say, I can get back to you on that one. I need to go back to my office and do some research and I'll bring that to you. I said, that's what happens in the real world. So when I get into a larger class online, that for me then becomes a challenge. So then it ends up becoming more of a paper and I have less opportunity to interact with them and give them the feedback that I can give them on the spot. So and partly why is because I'm somewhat connected to the industry. I know people. And so if they're applying for jobs, they might list me, our student might list me as a reference, or the potential employer knows that this student took my class and may call me and say, hey, Cindy, can you tell me about, John Smith and how do you do in your classroom or something? So at least I can say during this final presentation, they held their own, they held their composure, they made good eye contact, they were comfortable talking in a conversational tone as opposed to, trying to be too formal, because it's really not that formal as people might think in the insurance world. Anyway, it's just that difficulty with a larger class. And for me, a larger class is going to be, 15 to 35 students. 15 or less, I can do that one-on-one. 15 or more, it gets very difficult.
Yeah, I think that's the eternal struggle with creating presence, though, is it's difficult to do at scale. The first thing that comes to my mind is there a way to sort of make that a group assignment and have, 3 people all present to each other and then have a sort of structured response to say, what did you do when you didn't know the answer? Or, how did you think someone did explaining their rationale for a specific kind of insurance? And then your work is to really look at your job is to kind of look at the work of the group as a whole. But I'm wondering if anyone else has any thoughts about the best way to scale that.
I like that, Jessica, and especially if you're able to give sort of a framework for some questions to be thinking about as you're watching each other's. And that lends itself to in my perspective, and Cindy, you would know better than me, is would it be okay to do recorded videos and have those shared, where students can get that feedback? Like, the eye contact and things like that is probably a little harder for the online setting, right? Like staring into your camera is not exactly the same thing as
and what I have done is I have offered the students, you can, even in a bigger class, I say, if you want to meet with me one-on-one, happy to do it. Of course, now today would be via Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
They have a choice of that. They have a choice of writing the paper, or they can upload a video. And in however many years I've done this now, I think I've had 2 students do the video. And to me, that's easy because you don't have to write it all out, right? You just, you just talk to me, and then I video back. That if they've done a video to me, I'll video back. And it's not, I try to tell them it's not like you're in a speech class and I'm going to rate you on, every little thing, every and whatnot. I just want to hear how composed you are. How do you present the information that you have knowledge about? And if you don't, then you just say, this is something I'm going to need more information and look into that for you.
And that's super valuable feedback. I mean, you don't go to a talk with clients or do a job interview or any of those things and get that kind of feedback from someone. So it's an excellent opportunity.
Like they did for the group. So thank you.
Yeah. And a little addition on the technology end. Are you familiar at all with TechSmith Nomia? That's something that the university provides.
I am, but I'm not, you're taught how to do it, and then I don't use it again for another semester and I forget. So I'm not as comfortable with it as I'd like to be.
And, I think it would just kind of add some additional options if it's something you wanted to look into, because students have access to that as well. And yes, we can set you up or give you a link to make an appointment to walk through some of it with somebody. But what I like about it for what you're talking about is it lets you do time-stamped comments on it. So you'd actually be able to point out specific places in videos, and students would be able to do that with each other as well, which is kind of nice for some of those asynchronous options.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I am gonna, let's see, Allison up here had added in the chat. So one challenge she has in discussions is she wants to be present but doesn't want to impede discussion and interaction. That is an excellent one, Allison, because that's all about like the social interaction between peers kind of running up against that teaching presence, right? You want to be guiding and be present and have students know you're there. So let's talk. Does anybody have some things they've done that they would like to share with Allison to get that balance a little better?
Well, some of the comments were made already in the chat, but you're there more as the facilitator for the discussion as opposed to being in the discussion. So finding ways to help move it along. Like I said, can you expand a little more on that? Somebody put that in the chat. That's a great point. What the rest of you think, so that you're not dominating the conversation. You're just trying to push it back to them to allow them to have the discussion.
One thing I've done in the past also is I teach like a philosophy class for librarians. My previous career as a librarian, and a lot of it is that kind of discussion based. And I really want them to have a space where they don't feel like they have to get everything 100% right, because some of this stuff is very dense. So I'll just say, that was so interesting. That made me think of this other thing, or this reading, or have you heard of this, or something like that, just to help them make a connection between things that they already know. So that might also be a potential teaching presence, a potential role in that conversation of, oh, this is great, this makes me think of this, sort of give them another sort of avenue of thought or discussion.
Yeah, and also, you know, you can play different roles depending on what you want to get out of the discussion. You can be leading a discussion, you can be moderating the discussion, or you can actually tell them, hey, this is your discussion, I'm here to hear you guys, or I'm here to hear everybody. And in that sense, you know, they may react differently. And if you have a comment after every student comments something, then you're obviously leading it, compared to other, you know, possibilities that you can do with the discussion for them to feel comfortable talking among themselves, and you just being quote unquote fly on the wall up to a point. But they will react to your presence one way or another.
Yeah, it's just being purposeful at the beginning of the process, the beginning of the discussion. What's my role going to be here? It's so great.
I like that. And that's something that I think can also change over the course of the class as well. So, you know, maybe you need to start off being more of the facilitator and lead the discussion, and then, you know, kind of doing some of that modeling, and then also slowly back out of that, you know, and that's okay to be explicit about some of that. Like, I'm going to be jumping in here a lot this week to kind of help get the conversation going. And as we get used to this, I'm going to start turning this over to you guys a bit more. And you can even formalize those roles. You know, for classes where it makes sense to have students lead some of the discussion, being explicit about that role can be really powerful and a great opportunity for students as well.
Oh, I love that so much, Lainie. All right, if anyone else has any thoughts, again, please feel free to add them to the chat. But I want to move on to start wrapping some things up. I'll hand it over to you, Lainie.
Sorry, I'm getting disorganized on my desktop here. Okay, so basically just, you know, this is a moment to reflect back on what we've talked about, ask any follow-up questions, either about the theory part or how the different elements of presence react together, or maybe just things that seem valuable to you that you'd like to share with the group. So I'll let you guys take a moment, process that a bit. And again, feel free to put in the chat or say it out on the mic. But we would just like to hear a bit about your thoughts.
I do think that the main aspect that I have a constant struggle, and sometimes I may overthink it, overdo it, or once again, it may be overwhelming in different ways, is finding that specific balance. And sometimes it's easy to reach, sometimes it's extremely difficult. And by that, I mean, students are zoomed out, but you have to have presence. But if the videos are too long, they don't watch them. But people don't watch the videos anyway. But if you have a lot of reading, they don't read at all. And then, and it's not just about being negative here, it's about being realistic, and of course, listening to FCQ feedback and to talking to your students. I offer one-on-one Zoom. And to me, that's like the ultimate, but I only have 20% of the students take it, if that is it. And we're talking, you know, the student and myself, here it is, one-on-one. What do you want to know? What do you want me to explain? Go for it. And some take advantage of it, some don't. You also have to respect the lo-fi versus the low tech, I would say, because students are actually taking the class in their cell phones, others in laptops, others in iPads. Then you also have to have a balance between, and sorry, I can be here all day, but I'm not trying to overtake the conversation, but it is just that it is overwhelming. All these factors we have to consider. Who has access to the bandwidth? You said, who has low bandwidth, high one? is my video too long? Are they bored? Are they basically just, they're used to so many different types of videos. We have so many wonderful edits, and you in the background is very boring to them. So how do you have them come back and keep watching? If all the lectures are the same, et cetera. You can have whatever tone, you can be as personable and as nice as possible, but there are gonna be factors that affect it one way or another, and finding that balance of how do you do with working parents, different people that take online classes for different reasons, not just the pandemic right now. I have people stationed in military bases around the world, for example. So you have so much to deal with. And then of course you take workshop after workshop and it all piles up. And how do I actually make the online class at least accessible, at the very least, to everybody at the same time? And I know CU Online has requirements, but at the same time, it's like, well, we can't guarantee, and we can use that as a syllabus point. Like, well, we told you had to, but we have to be realistic too. And of course, we're here for them. So sometimes I find that really difficult to balance and include everybody, not making everybody happy. Like I said before, that's practically impossible. But making sure that you include as many people, technologically speaking, presence-wise, into the class, and then, you know, different types of assignments, and you name it, in the class and the material. I teach race and ethnicity. That can go sensitive in 2 seconds, of course, etc. So a lot of different challenges. So sorry for the rambling, but I just wanted to just, I know this is not a therapy session. I'm just saying that I struggle with that, with the balancing of all those factors together.
You're being real. And then that's exactly right. I mean, there's no perfect solution, and it can be hard. It's just this part of why this takes so much work and effort on the part of the instructor to do it well, is because it's not that the technology just makes it easy and seamless. There's people out there, and I'm sure that also makes it so that your students find you much more valuable because you're aware of that. You know, you're not living in this bubble like, the internet just takes care of it for me. I could just post a video and not care about what you're doing as a student. But it's something that we all have to learn to navigate in our own way and find what we can lean into a bit more. And some of that is like, what's working the best and most consistently in my class, and I'm going to focus my time on making that as good as I can make it, right? And I don't know, Carlos, I love that you brought up like deployed military as an audience. They're always elsewhere. Like that's going to be a permanent state of being, right? So what are some of those solutions for that? And I think, not needing to box ourselves into a particular solution is a really good place to start. I don't know if you've tried just audio before, or if that's practical for what you're teaching, but that might also be something just to keep in mind for a potential path there.
The audio and the presence, because you have very interesting points of just that actual presence, and through audio, and then you also have a lot of text, a lot of reading, and that's also respecting their privacy. They can access text in any context, whether you're taking care of your children, whether you are here, you don't need the headphones, you don't need to be distracted or not distracted, once again. And it's something that you sometimes think you're helping them, but then of course you're always gonna have students have different methods of different ways of learning. The pedagogy, of course, is going to apply to people differently. Some students hate the exams, they hate papers, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's been years of teaching, and you're always going to be conscious of that. But like I said, audio is a good option, and something that I want to try a little bit more, especially right now when we're talking about that accessibility factor, which I think is very important, because everything is overloaded and people are zoomed out. I mean, I already had like student meetings like with like 10 different students in the second week, and half of them like, I'm zoomed out, and I'm like, well, it's just the second week. Yeah, 14 more to go. So let's work around that. And I don't know what we can do, but we still, it's until May.
A few of my colleagues are moving more toward using the phone again, because they're just like, I'm tired of having to sit at the computer, and at least with my phone.
I offer telephone appointments. Like if you want a telephone appointment or a Zoom Canvas message or email. I have 4 different ways you can contact me, whatever you prefer, whatever is best for you. Once again, I don't have a problem with that, of course. Most people still prefer email or Canvas message.
One thing I always think about when it comes to stuff like this, and I know this is really tough and probably controversial to say, but like, where can you cut out content? Like, it's really stepping back and thinking about, yeah, oh, Friday, we're getting loopy. Looking through your syllabus, looking through your courses and thinking about what's the most important things here. And instead of moving on to the next thing, having the next day, the next class be time for practice, time for reflection, time for writing, time for talking. So it's just, we're still on this one idea. We're just giving it more time and more space and more oxygen and more energy, that it's depth instead of breadth. I know that that's not always easy. I know we have learning outcomes. I know we have all of these things that we want to address and reach and cover. But I think that at the end of the day, just like, where can you cut stuff out? And that necessarily opens up room and space for more time to have those connections. Not just with you and the students, but between the student and the idea.
Yeah.
And that's not controversial at all. Oh, sorry, Cindy, my apologies.
That's okay. Go ahead, Carl.
That's actually something we usually do and we have to do. Yes, it could be so long for each lecture, whether it's on campus or online or on an online PowerPoint, online transcript, etc. Even with the videos, I mean, if it's not a movie, they're not going to be there for an hour and a half. That's almost like practically impossible. And then I have short videos that are called crash courses, and I use this series that it's online, and she talks really, really fast. And she was like, she talks really fast, and I'm like, well, pay attention to the video, of course. But I also understand that sometimes they can't follow because she talks too fast. And I'm like, you can actually lower the speed of the video on YouTube. And you can do it at 1.5 times or at 0.5 times, etc. And that actually helps. Sorry, Cindy.
Okay. One of the classes if the students pass my class with a B or better, they receive credit for an insurance designation for one of their exams. So I can't necessarily ethically not cover the content. But one of the things I try to do when I have, I guess now with the Zoom class or an in-person, is I'll try to bring in a speaker from that part of the industry that can give them a better example of reinsurance, because that's not an area I ever worked in. So I'll find somebody in the industry that talks about reinsurance, and they'll come in and speak so the students can see how what they just learned is applied into the from the textbook to real life. And thankfully we have enough students that have graduated from our program that are in the industry here in Denver, and I'll bring them in to talk about what they've learned, and whether it's Mr. Eric's class or my class, and how they were able to immediately apply that in the business world. And they sometimes what I hear is, you're the only class I took in college that I'm actually using that information in my job. And probably because it is somewhat restricted with risk management insurance. I'm sure it'd be the same thing for people in physical therapy, but for a lot of the classes in university, people just go, I just never use it again. All of our information, again, Mr. Eric's, mine, and Dr. Shim's and Dr. Daly's are used by our students. So that's some applicable learning.
I actually had just a question for Carlos. When you were talking about slowing down the tape speed, the playback, so to speak, was that, does the faculty member do that when recording the video, or are the students do that if they want when they're playing it back? That's what I wasn't clear on.
No, I said that's a feature you find on YouTube. So if you're using YouTube videos, you go to the YouTube video, and when it has the little setup or the little settings little wheel,
okay,
you click on that one, and you can click on the speed of the audio, and you can actually reduce it to the point that this is the only time in my life I had to use it, because she talks really fast, but it's called Crash Course. So that's the whole thing. She gets a whole chapter in 9 minutes, and that's the only time I've ever had to use it.
All right.
So just some quick final thoughts. I mean, this is a topic we could spend ages talking about. We could just keep meeting and come up with new ideas every week, I think. But, you know, kind of the key nuggets here. This is about being thoughtful and intentional, and being okay with curating some of your strategies, trying some different things. The intent here is really about engaging with your students, and also thinking about the fact that it's not just you and them. It's not just them in the content. It's them with each other, them with you, you with them as a group or individuals, and hopefully a mix of both. And that it is okay to start small. You know, small things that we do to tweak this can make a really big impact, and we don't have to go full bore into, you know, huge production time to make this super engaging graphically designed video. We can do things that are small, that present us as human, and that's an excellent place to start, and help our students do the same in our classes. So we've just got this page. You'll get all this information in an email, so you'll have the opportunity to look through references and resources. There is a workshop evaluation. If you have feedback for us, we're always happy to hear it too. It helps us make things better. And then, you know, if you have questions or just other things that you want to chat about, I think I can speak for both of us, Jessica, that we're both happy to do that one-on-one as well. So it was really lovely having you guys here today. You are all very thoughtful instructors, which makes this discussion even more amazing, and so glad to have you all.
Thank you all so much. Have such a good weekend. Go outside, pet a dog.
Jessica.
For me.
That's the perfect icebreaker right there. I mean, I cannot tell you, I cannot leave without saying, I wish you get a dog soon. I wish you were allowed to get a dog soon. Like, seriously, I'm like software here for you. It's like,
dogs for everyone.
Have a dog? So anyway, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. It was a great workshop. And Jessica, I already, you know, I was there at your other workshop for the academic integrity, and thank you so much for that one as well. It was a wonderful weekend. Eric, good to meet you. Allison, seen you before as well. I think you were in that other one as well. Nicole, everybody, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Carlos, thank you, everybody.
Are you going now too?
I'm gonna upload the, let me turn off the recording.